I was sipping stale breakroom coffee when I saw him, Elliot, walking down the hall like a man heading to his own execution. No jacket, no laptop, just that tiny manila folder he always carried with those stupid green post-it tabs poking out the side. He didn't look scared, didn't look angry, just hollowed out, like someone had reached in and scooped the man clean. And then I saw her, Melissa from HR, already waiting for him by the double glass conference door with her signature smug little tilt head that always said, "This'll only take a minute." She held the paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. "This is immediate termination," she said, loud enough for the whole corridor to hear. "Your badge has already been disabled." He didn't flinch, just nodded once like he'd already seen this movie. They didn't even give him the dignity of an exit interview. No box, no handshake, just 2 clicks on a keyboard and a poster in the hallway before he'd even made it out of the damn building. His ID photo, blown up and grainy, plastered in the HR glass case like a mugshot with the words, "Terminated, do not rehire," slapped underneath it in blood-red Arial bold. I felt my stomach twist. You don't do that to a guy like Elliot. Not unless you want something to snap. Quick note before I go further. If you're into stories where corporate karma hits like a freight train and the quiet guy nobody listened to ends up holding the detonator, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and like the video. It really helps our team keep bringing you more stories that make you want to scream, cheer, and maybe burn your old HR handbook. Back to Elliot. The woman at the front desk, Tina, was whispering when he passed. "They didn't even wait for his audit window to close. Isn't that a violation or something?" But HR didn't care. Melissa and her little clipboard brigade had already moved on to purging him from systems like he'd never existed. Emails deactivated, Slack gone. One IT guy even said they wiped his VPN mid-download. I knew something was off when he didn't fight it, didn't ask why, just slipped that folder under his arm and walked. I'd worked with Elliot for almost 4 years in compliance. He was the kind of guy who read every footnote of every clause, the kind who didn't speak unless the silence needed correcting. If he didn't say anything, it wasn't because he had nothing to say. It was because he was letting the rope tighten. I remember the way Melissa's voice followed him as he left the glass room. "We've updated your profile. You won't be back." Her tone was giddy, like she'd just landed a promotion, not axed the one guy who actually understood the audit playbook we were all barely pretending to follow. The thing is, Elliot wasn't flashy, never raised his voice. He documented things, silently, thoroughly. The kind of man who left breadcrumb trails not because he expected to need them, but because he knew someday someone else would. And if HR thought his silence was surrender, they were about to learn the hard way that Elliot Barnes didn't do exit interviews. He did autopsies, and they just handed him a corpse. At exactly 9:03 the next morning, the first hairline crack formed. It didn't come from a dramatic confrontation or some angry ex-employee email. No, it came from a dashboard. A quiet little shared compliance portal we all pretended didn't exist until a badge swipe went wrong or a contract got flagged by a regulator. On most days, it sat there humming quietly in the background. Green lights, status checks, silence. But that morning, one light blinked red. Primary Compliance Liaison, Elliot Barnes. Status, active in system registry. Internal note, terminated. Do not rehire. The auditor, a guy named Ron Feldman out of the DC office, known more for his oatmeal sweaters than his sense of urgency, clicked twice, frowned, then leaned forward. The liaison database wasn't synced. Elliot's credentials were still active on the federal end, still tied to an ongoing cross-border data review we'd been juggling for 6 months. The same audit Elliot had flagged repeatedly for needing a formal transition plan, the same one HR never believed was serious. Ron typed a single sentence into the shared support channel. Not angry, not accusatory, just protocol. This liaison appears to be marked as terminated on internal HR documentation. Please confirm reassignment protocol per clause 6B. 6B. God help us. It was the kind of clause people skim during onboarding, right before signing the last page of a 47-page policy doc nobody reads. But Elliot had read it, lived by it, breathed it. That clause said plain as daylight that if a designated federal liaison is removed during an active audit, the company must file a pre-clearance replacement and hand over certification 48 hours before termination. No wiggle room, no oops, no HR discretion. We didn't do that. Hell, I doubt HR even knew Clause 6B existed. Melissa, queen of termination by lunchtime, had probably been too busy practicing her smug little smirk in the bathroom mirror to check whether the man she just ghosted had any open federal ties. And now that oversight had just gone digital, on a system time-stamped by the feds, by 9:17 a.m., legal had seen the ticket. Their reply was fast, but shaky. "We are reviewing internal records to verify status. Thank you for your patience," which was legalese for "oh shit, oh shit, oh shit." At 9:24, someone tried to manually remove Elliot's name from the registry. The system blocked it. "Pending audit, contact federal liaison." And guess what? That liaison was Elliot. The room got quiet. It started tracing logins. Legal asked for every document Elliot had touched in the last 30 days. Nobody said it out loud, but I could feel it crawling up everyone's spine. We didn't just fire a guy, we fired a lock. And now the only key was somewhere we couldn't reach. I sat at my desk watching the chat thread light up like a Christmas tree, and I thought about the manila folder, the tabs. The green ones always meant federal. He took it with him. Not angrily, just deliberately. Like he knew the system would blink red, like he counted on it. We thought we could cut Elliot Barnes like dead weight, but we just severed the safety line without checking if we were still attached to the cliff. And now, down below, something was starting to shift. A gentle breeze before the landslide. By 10:05 a.m., the panic was still polite, still dressed in pressed suits and pretending to be under control. Legal had its war room huddle, and everyone spoke in low tones and acronyms, but you could feel it in the air. Something foundational had shifted, and we weren't standing on solid ground anymore. First thing they did was send Lacey, junior counsel, still shiny from law school and always clutching a mechanical pencil like it gave her courage, to call Elliot's cell. She dialed 3 times. No answer. No voicemail. Just that long, hollow silence that makes you feel like maybe the person on the other end is listening, just choosing not to respond. Lacey looked up with that nervous half-smile, like maybe someone else would want to try. Melissa from HR waved her off without missing a beat. "We don't owe him anything," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "He was at will. Termination was legal. He doesn't hold any privileges post-exit." The room nodded, half out of habit, half because nobody wanted to poke the bear, but one person didn't move. Gerald Lang, our general counsel, mid-60s, graying mustache, looked like a man born in a 3-piece suit, was sitting at the far end of the table. His hand hovered over his coffee mug, eyes narrowed, not blinking. He didn't look at Melissa, didn't look at Lacey. He just reached behind him and pulled out the one thing none of us had seen in years, the red compliance binder. The real one. The one Elliot used to update himself. The one legal hadn't touched since we transitioned to the cloud and started pretending protocol was optional. He flipped to a tab near the back. Clause 11? No. Clause 6, subsection B. His finger traced the words out loud. Termination of a named compliance officer during active audit periods shall constitute a presumptive breach unless pre-cleared by the agency. The room went very still. Melissa, suddenly not as smug, muttered, "That's probably outdated." But Gerald shook his head. "We never rescinded the designation. Elliot was the named liaison on the Q4 cross-border audit. His removal without notice is a documented breach." Lacey whispered, "But if we can show it was accidental—" "Doesn't matter," Gerald snapped. "The clause doesn't care about intention, only protocol. The minute we revoked his badge without agency pre-clearance, we breached continuity." Melissa blinked, like the words didn't compute. "But we already updated his profile. We marked him inactive." "That's the problem," Gerald said quietly. "You did it too soon." I could feel the blood drain from every face in the room, because now it wasn't just a fired employee or a broken portal, it was a presumptive federal breach, with teeth, and fines, and investigations, and a nice fat stain on every investor report from now until the end of Q2. Melissa tried again. "Can't we just say it was an internal systems error? We put someone else in his place now." "Who?" Gerald asked. "Do they have federal clearance? Do they have a signed liaison transition log? Are they registered with the agency?" No one answered, because the truth was simple. No one replaced Elliot. HR just deleted him like a bad Slack thread. But federal systems don't delete, they timestamp. And that timestamp just told the audit trail that we terminated our only qualified officer mid-investigation, without so much as a heads up. And Elliot? He wasn't saying a word. Which, coming from him, was worse than shouting. It meant he'd already read this page. and decided to let us turn it ourselves. It started with a routine inquiry. At least, that's how Derek from IT described it. Just a normal sweep, checking the residual syncs from Elliot's deactivated credentials. But by the time he reached the third mirrored directory and stopped mid-scroll, his tone shifted. I heard it myself. He came into the break room pale and scratching behind his ear like he was trying to scrub something off his brain. "Did you know he had full SOC 3 dual access clearance?" He asked nobody in particular. "Because I didn't. And I'm the one who processed the deactivation request." Someone mumbled, "Wasn't that just for remote compliance checks?" Derek shook his head. "Sure, that's what it was called. But the folders on his local drive weren't just mirror images, they were versioned, time-stamped. He didn't just download the most recent files, he downloaded specific ones, 72, to be exact." That number hit me like a slap. 72. Last week, the audit liaison had sent us a pre-flag summary, 72 anomalies, minor inconsistencies in vendor chain of custody forms, export compliance lag windows, a couple unvetted access points that slipped past monthly credential audits. Nothing that screamed scandal, until you considered them together. Elliot had. That much was obvious now. Legal had been scrambling for 24 hours to clean up the liaison mismatch without triggering a full-blown agency alert. But now I had discovered that Elliot, who'd been quietly building those audit packets for weeks, had preserved every single flagged document. And he took them with him, not in some shady off-site heist, not in a backdoor data grab. He'd done it by the book. His access was active, his status still cleared, and the backups were consistent with the agency's own continuity protocols. So no, it wasn't illegal, but it was intentional, deliberate, controlled. And suddenly, every exec in that glass tower started wondering the same thing. Did he know? Did Elliot see the writing on the wall before any of us? Did he anticipate Melissa's little performance, Gerald's binder panic, Lacey's useless calls? Did he catalog 72 separate compliance failures, back them up, and then wait for us to kick him out without noticing the grenade we just unpinned? Melissa was the first to scoff. Even if he had them, he's still under NDA. He can't do anything with them. Gerald raised an eyebrow. If the agency subpoenas him as a named liaison, that NDA's irrelevant. He's not a whistleblower. He's a cooperating authority. Her smirk vanished so fast I thought it snapped a neck vertebrae. I remembered the last day Elliot worked late. Everyone else was already halfway through Thursday happy hour, but he was still in his little compliance cubicle, scanning page after page with his headphones in. He didn't rush. He wasn't stalling. He was finishing something. Derek dropped a thumb drive on the table. His terminal kept an offline cache too. Do we want to see what he didn't sync? Lacey said no. Gerald said yes. I said nothing, because I already knew. This wasn't a disgruntled ex-employee with a grudge. This was Elliot Barnes, detail man, policy hound, paper trail surgeon. And if he left with 72 files, then every one of them had a purpose, a pattern, a pulse. He didn't just walk out with a folder. He walked out with a mirror. And the reflection? It was about to start screaming. By Friday morning, it was no longer just a situation. It had mutated into something slower, colder, and far more dangerous, like an ice shelf cracking under its own weight. Legal had gone from tense whispers to full-volume triage, and Melissa, she wasn't parading her clipboard anymore. She was locked behind a closed door with 2 VPs and a sweating paralegal who kept running out of breath. HR had tried to deflect it. IT had tried to bury it, and now the lawyers were trying to contain it. And Elliot? Elliot didn't say a damn word. One of the senior partners, Leland Strauss, a man so old he still used a landline phone in his office, left a message himself, not his assistant, not junior counsel, him. The same guy who once scoffed that compliance was an overpaid alarm clock. Now his voice trembled ever so slightly as it hit Elliot's voicemail with manufactured casualness. "Hi, Elliot. This is Leland Strauss with Corporate Counsel. We'd like to confirm you understand your obligations around proprietary data and confidentiality under Section 12 of your separation paperwork. Please return our call." Nothing. No call back, no email, not even a read receipt. Just static. By early afternoon, the silence had its own weight. Gerald paced near the printer like something might materialize to save us. Meanwhile, I watched a junior assistant from facilities quietly remove Elliot's nameplate from the compliance cubicle, as if that would erase him from the audit log. Then, at exactly 3:15 p.m., the hammer fell. A formal inquiry arrived at the company's registered legal inbox, stamped and signed from the Federal Data Oversight Office. The kind of thing that doesn't get sent unless someone in Washington is very, very unhappy. It read, "To whom it may concern, we have been informed that the Registered Compliance Liaison of Record, Mr. Elliot Barnes, has been terminated. Our records show no filed pre-clearance notification nor reassignment log per Clause 6B. Please submit revised audit logs and supporting rationale within 48 hours. Failure to comply may result in temporary suspension of data certification privileges." I swear I heard Gerald's jaw clench. You don't get 48 hours from the FDO unless you're already being treated like a liability. It meant they weren't asking out of curiosity. They were building a paper trail. Hours. And here's what twisted the knife deeper. Elliot didn't leak anything, didn't run to the press, didn't drop some viral post about wrongful termination or blow up the company on Glassdoor. He just waited. That's what made it worse. The stillness. He wasn't hiding, he wasn't angry, he was just patient. Like he knew the company would talk itself into a corner if he left them alone long enough. It wasn't a bomb, it was a timer. And now we were down to 47 hours, 46 minutes, and zero exit strategy. At 6:42 a.m. the next morning, before the board had even wiped the sleep from their eyes or brewed their overpriced coffee, an email landed in the agency's inbox. No subject line fluff, no pleasantries, just one quiet, surgical transmission sent directly to the lead auditor at the FDO. From Elliot Barnes to oversight.liaison, fdo.gov, attachment. Clause 8B/handoff dispute.pdf. I didn't see the contents firsthand, but I watched Gerald read it, the way his mouth drew tight, the way he slowly lowered his glasses like gravity had doubled. Then he handed it to Lacey without a word and walked straight into the executive boardroom, face pale and stunned like a man who'd just realized his parachute was stitched together with lies. Lacey muttered while reading, "Oh my God." The attachment was an email chain, 6 months old, time-stamped, clean, polite, and devastating. Elliot had flagged repeatedly that HR had refused to implement the new audit handoff procedure required for external compliance liaisons. Specifically, he'd warned that if he were ever removed from his post without a cleared, federally registered replacement, the data handling designation would lapse. The emails showed legal agreeing in principle but punting the responsibility to HR. HR, of course, punted it into the sun. And at the bottom of that chain, like a sniper's bullet aimed squarely at the company's legal spine, sat Clause 8B from the federal contract. In absence of a designated replacement with cleared status, data handling shall be considered unsecured. All activity under unsecured conditions shall be presumed non-compliant pending audit resolution. We weren't just behind on a form. We weren't just in a protocol gray zone. We were unsecured. That meant every access log, every vendor sync, every inter-system transfer that had occurred since the moment Elliot's badge was disabled was now presumptively invalid. And not because he said so, because the agency said so. That email didn't go through us. It bypassed every firewall, every PR consultant, every corrective action draft we were about to force-feed the regulators. The FDO saw it before we even knew it existed, which meant the narrative wasn't ours anymore. It belonged to the evidence, and Elliot had written it 6 months ago. Gerald came out of the boardroom looking like a ghost. "They're going to freeze us," he muttered. "There's no wiggle room in Clause 8. It's self-triggering, automatic." Melissa tried to argue, said something about interpretive leniency and good faith internal restructuring, but the damage was baked in. The FDO doesn't care about good faith, it cares about continuity, and ours had been obliterated by a woman too proud to click reply all and a company too arrogant to listen when the quietest person in the room handed them a flashlight and said, "You're heading into a cave. You might want this." I sat back and watched the chaos ripple outward. Phones started ringing. A VP swore under his breath and said something about pushing the acquisition timeline. Someone from finance asked if the freeze would affect escrow release. And somewhere in all of that noise, I thought about Elliot again. He hadn't gone scorched earth. He hadn't hacked anything. He didn't burn bridges or make threats. He had simply left a trail of truth behind and waited for someone to trip over it. This wasn't revenge. This was architecture. The boardroom was a silent tomb by the time Gerald walked in, shoulders heavy like he was dragging a coffin instead of a leather folio. Nobody spoke. Not the CEO, who suddenly had nothing visionary to say. Not the investor rep, who'd flown in from Chicago to monitor the situation. Not even Melissa, who now stared at her nail beds like they held the secrets of salvation. Gerald didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, eyes bloodshot, voice calm but trembling in that way that made every executive in the room sit up straighter. He laid the envelope down, tan, creased, a little warped like it had been mailed and re-mail forwarded through multiple systems. "We have confirmation," he said, eyes scanning the room. "By terminating Mr. Barnes without pre-clearance or reassignment protocol, we have violated not one, but two federal continuity provisions, Clause 6B and 8B, both now formally logged with the FDO. A few board members exchanged glances. One cleared his throat and muttered, "But the audit hasn't closed. Couldn't we?" Gerald cut him off with a slow shake of his head. "It's already triggered. The agency isn't asking for clarification. They're preparing for inspection. We have 41 hours to produce compliant logs or they initiate full data freeze procedures." He reached into the folio and pulled out the envelope. "And there's more." "Where did you get that?" the CFO asked, his voice a mix of dread and hope. "It was mailed to Mr. Barnes's legal counsel. They were compelled to submit it under subpoena. Elliot anticipated the agency might need a record of his concerns, so he preserved a hard copy of material he already had authorized access to under SOC 03 review protocol. It includes the following." He slid 3 sheets across the polished mahogany table. Page 1. A timeline of unflagged data transfers across unsecured systems during the transition period. 32 instances, each one mapped to a known federal compliance timestamp. Page 2. A list of third-party contractors who were granted access during the lapse. Half of them were never vetted under our own standards. 3 of them, red flagged under vendor review 6 months ago. I watched one of the directors, a man who always bragged about running risk mitigation, pull his chair back like the evidence might physically bite him. And page 3? Gerald lifted the last sheet with 2 fingers. It was short, just one typed sentence above Elliot's familiar signature. "Attached for clarity, please consult 6B before next steps." That was it. No threats, no grand declarations, just one line, clean and cold as steel. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. A junior board member asked if this could be contained. Gerald didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. "The FDO has already frozen preliminary certifications. If we can't produce corrected handover logs and updated liaison documentation by Monday, we're looking at full operational suspension. If they escalate to the Data Integrity Office..." He stopped, swallowing hard. "We could lose our license. Permanently." Someone cursed under their breath. Another stood and paced, running fingers through his hair like it might stimulate divine intervention. The CEO finally spoke. "So what's the play? Damage control? PR? Can we spin this?" Gerald just looked at him with something between pity and contempt. "No," he said. "You can't spin federal procedure. You comply with it, or you drown." The boardroom fractured then, half of them shouting, the other half already dialing their assistants, brokers, anyone who might offer a parachute before impact. But none of them noticed me, sitting quietly, watching it all, because I'd seen the moment this began. It wasn't when Elliot walked out. It was when nobody asked what he took with him, and now they knew. He didn't take data, he took the oxygen, and left the matches behind. The first buyer pulled out before noon. No warning, no last-minute negotiation. Just a curt email from Morningside Capital's acquisitions lead. "In light of regulatory instability and unresolved certification matters, we are suspending all transaction activity until further notice." A second followed within the hour, then a third. All of them circling the same drain, repeating the same phrase: regulatory instability. That's the phrase they use when your compliance officer becomes a federal exhibit. By 2 p.m., the pending acquisition, something the CEO had practically tattooed on his chest for the last 3 quarters, was on ice. Publicly, they called it paused. Privately, every investor on the Q3 call heard the truth. You're toxic now. No firm wants to acquire a company staring down a possible suspension of its federal data certs. It's like buying a building already half swallowed by a sinkhole. The FDO's recommendation came in at 3:06 p.m., not a final judgment, but close enough to send the C-suite into chaos. Due to unresolved liaison gaps and non-compliant data continuity, the agency recommends a precautionary freeze of current certifications pending full compliance review. It was all happening. The trigger Elliot had warned about 6 months ago, now blooming like a slow-motion detonation in every department from procurement to cloud ops. Vendor dashboards started auto-locking. International clients demanded reassurances we didn't have. Even the internal file sharing system went into partial lockdown pending re-verification of permissions. Someone tried calling Elliot again. Not Lacey this time. She'd burned that bridge already. This time it was Gerald himself. He didn't even bother pretending it was about liability or protocol. He asked Elliot, through his attorney, if he would be willing to participate in a cooperative transition for the purposes of restoring federal standing. Translation: we'll stop pretending you don't exist if you'll just sign this paper and make the audit go away. The response came 22 minutes later. Short, surgical, pure Elliot. Per my former status, all responsibilities ceased the moment you revoked access. That was it. No anger, no flourish, just a mirror turned gently toward them. Melissa, who'd once bragged that compliance officers are just backup dancers in Legal's show, finally left the building with her face down and her email set to ooh. Half the board was huddled with crisis PR strategists who couldn't spin what was essentially self-inflicted sabotage. Gerald looked 10 years older, and the CEO? Well, he stopped talking altogether, just sat behind his desk rereading old investor updates like they might turn back into truth. And all the while, Elliot didn't move, didn't run toward them, didn't try to bargain for revenge or leverage because he didn't need them. Never did. The whole company had been built around the illusion that they could replace anyone, streamline anyone, erase anyone. But Elliot? He wasn't anyone. He was the quiet breath between systems, the pause between clauses, the man who knew that sometimes you don't need to burn a company down, you just need to stop holding it up. Elliot sat by the window in a quiet co-working loft off 8th and Jefferson, third floor, corner seat, far enough from the espresso machine that the noise blurred into white hum. No suit, no badge, just him, a half-empty mug, and a second-hand laptop patched with agency stickers from 3 contracts ago. Outside, the world moved on like it always did. Buses screeching, pigeons fighting over nothing, a teenager on a bird scooter nearly taking out a florist cart. But inside that little room, the air felt still, finished, clean. He refreshed the news feed once just out of habit. There it was. Regulatory inquiry delays acquisition of Velmonic systems amid compliance gaps. Below the headline, the article ticked through bullet points like a slow drip. Buyer withdrawal, temporary license hold, formal investigation into procedural irregularities during active audit cycles. No mention of him by name, no spotlight. But the shadow of his work hung in every line. His phone vibrated just once. A new email. Subject: Director of Compliance Opportunity, your federal liaison record. Body: Hi Elliot, saw your name on the registry and was impressed by your track record. We're building a new division with compliance at the center. No red tape, no posturing. Just clean work, real authority. Interested in chatting? He smiled, not smug, not gloating. Just that quiet, tired grin of someone who saw the wreckage and knew it could have been avoided if someone, anyone, had just listened before deciding to erase him. He clicked reply. Let's talk after the hearing. No hurry. The agency would finish its process, as it always did. No cutting corners, no whispered favors, just a ledger, updated with truth. Elliot didn't need revenge. He'd already built something better. The silence had been the strategy. The exit, just timing. The aftermath, that was theirs to carry. He closed the laptop gently, took one last sip of now cold coffee, and looked out the window like a man watching the tide go out after a storm. Not because he missed what was there, but because it proved he was right to leave before it drowned. They posted his photo like a warning, but he had something better. He had the paper trail.